Hey guys, so before we jump into right triangles, we need to go back to Algebra 1 a little bit and review simplifying radicals, because those are going to show up again. So again, this should be a review from Algebra 1, but we're just going to go through a couple of examples to refresh your memory. The first thing we're going to do is use a factor ladder using prime numbers. So if you remember, prime numbers are things that are numbers that can only be divided by themselves and the number 1. Then we're going to group those prime numbers by the type of root we're simplifying. So if it's a square root, like these two examples are, that means we're looking for groups of 2. If the index were a 3, like a cube root, we'd be looking for groups of 3 that are the same. So that'll probably make more sense in a minute. And then the last thing is that we're going to group pairs of 2 together, and we're going to pull those outside the radical. So anytime we see a matching pair of numbers, we're going to pull those outside and everything else gets left in. So let's start with radical 28. I'm going to start with dividing using my prime numbers. And I think it's always wise to start with the smallest number first, because then you have all of your numbers in a row. So similar ones will be next to each other, so they'll be easier to see. So I'm going to do 28 divided by 2, and I get 14. And I'm going to see if I can divide that number again by 2, and I can. So I'll do 14 divided by 2, and I get 7. And then 7 is a prime number, so the only thing I can divide it by is itself and 1. So I'm going to divide 7 by 7, and I end with 1. And somebody once told me that it's like an upside down birthday cake. So you know that you're finished when you have a candle at the bottom, which is your 1, which I think is kind of cool. And I also really like food, so anything that relates to food is good with me. So now we're going to take our factors here. We're going to list those out. 2 times 2 times 7 times 1. And again, we're looking for any groups of 2 that are alike. So here I have 2 2's, so I'm going to circle those. Anytime I have a group, I'm going to write it outside my radical. So I'm going to take those pair of 2's, I'm going to write it outside the radical, and then the 7 and the 1, we keep those together inside. So 7 times 1 is just 7. So our final answer here would be 2 radical 7. And if you ever want to make sure, one thing that I like to do is I'll type radical 28 into my calculator. What's going to end up happening is that you get a decimal answer for that. But when I do 2 radical 7, I'm going to get that same decimal answer, so it matches. So that's a good way to check it. Let's look at example number 2. So over here, we have a coefficient out front. That's okay. It's actually really similar to the steps we're going to do, but we're going to ignore that number 2 until the very end. So let's start with radical 80, and let's go ahead and do our factor ladder here. And I'm going to divide. I'm going to see if I can divide by 2, and I can. I'm going to get lots of 2's for this one. So 80 divided by 2 is 40. And then 40 divided by 2 gives me 20. 20 divided by 2 is going to give me 10. And then again, I can divide 10 by 2, and I get 5. Now 5 is my prime number, which means the only thing I can divide it by is itself and 1. So I'll divide by 5, and then I'll end with my candle on top, my 1. So now I'm going to take all of those 2's, and the 5 and the 1, all of those factors, and I'm going to write them underneath my radical. So it looks like I have 4 2's, a 5, and a 1. Alright, so now I'm going to look for groups of 2. So let's see, I have a pair of 2's here and a pair of 2's here. And when I say groups of 2, I don't mean necessarily 2 2's, just 2 numbers that are the same. So if there was a pair of 5's or a pair of 3's, anytime you have a pair of the same number, you would circle those. So now I'm going to take, for each pair that I circled, I'm going to write it outside once. So here I'm going to write those pair of 2's once. And then this one I'm going to write once. And then underneath the radical, we're going to have that leftover 5 and 1. They don't have any pairs to go with them. Alright, now, remember I said we had that 2 in the beginning. So here we have this 2 in front. This is just a factor. Anytime you have 2 numbers right next to each other like that, like a 2 and radical 80, that means 2 times radical 80. So I'm going to take that 2, and I'm just going to drop it down here with whatever else is out front. So now we have 3 2's. We're going to multiply those all together. So if I have 2 times 2 times 2, Let's see, 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. And then again, inside that radical, 5 times 1 is just going to be 5. So our final answer here is 8 radical 5. And again, we could double check that in the calculator. If you type in 2 radical 80, you're going to get a decimal answer because it's an irrational number. If I type in 8 radical 5, I should get that same exact decimal answer. So again, that's a good way to check your work.